Okay, we get started. Thank you, Shani. In the year 2010, the United States Geological Survey estimated the natural gas reserves in the Eastern Mediterranean basin at about 3,400 BCM. For the most part, these fields were located offshore from Israel, Cyprus, and Lebanon in what is known as the Levant Basin. The Israeli gas fields, Tamar, Dalit, and Leviathan, were estimated at 714 BCM. For comparative purposes, Israel's natural gas consumption for the year 2010 was 5.2 BCM only. The relevant offshore rights recognized by International Maritime Law Convention, the UNCLOS, as economic waters, which prima facie are the waters extending 200 miles from the offshore from the baselines of each state. Under the convention, each state had the right to exploit for its purposes the natural resources situated in the economic waters themselves or in the underlying sea bottom and ledges. The convention also permits the adjoining states to establish installations in the economic waters relating to the exploitation of resources in their economic zone. The convention relates to and takes into account of disputes with adjoining states or states situated opposite each other in order to establish what waters constitute the economic zone of each such state. In these circumstances, the convention obliges the relevant states to arrive at an equitable solution in a spirit of understanding and cooperation. In the absence of a solution, the convention provides for a number of solutions such as conciliation, international arbitration, the International Tribunal, ITCOS, or referral to the International Court of Justice, the ICJ. In the year 2007, an agreement was signed between Lebanon and Cyprus for the deviation of economic waters between them. Under the agreement, the boundary of the economic waters is the line which transgresses 6 points from the south to north, with the southmost point being point number 1. Cyprus ratified the agreement in 2009, but Lebanon did not do so, presumably in order not to antagonize Turkey, which does not recognize any agreement concerning Cyprus' economic waters, which does not include the rights of what is called the Turkish Cyprus. In May, July, and October 2009, Lebanon filed with the Secretary General of the United Nations a list of coordinates defining what is considered to be its economic waters, which differs from those points agreed upon by Lebanon and Cyprus, which in particular include 2 further points which are not in Lebanon's agreement with Cyprus, point number 23 in the area of the border with Israel and point number 7 in the north. In 2010, Israel and Cyprus established the division of economic waters between them. Under this agreement, the boundary is that which passes through 12 points from north to south. The most northern point in the Cyprus-Israel agreement is the point number 1, with the effect that the economic sea zone between Israel and Cyprus starts from point number 1 and continues to the south. In this manner, the northern boundary of Israel's economic waters is the southern boundary of the Lebanese economic waters as agreed between Lebanon and Cyprus. In 2011, Israel lodged it with the Secretary General of the United Nations a list of coordinates constituting its economic waters as a state having a seaboard. As arises from the letters and documents sent by each of the states to the Secretary General of the United Nations, over the years, it is possible to identify the nature of the disputes of areas of disagreement between Israel and Lebanon as follows. Israel claims that the northern point of its economic zone extends from point number 1 in the west in the sea to a specific point in the shore in Rosh Hanikra known as point 31, whilst Lebanon contends that the southern border of its economic zone extends from point 23 in the west to a specific point on the shore named at Ras Nakura being point B1. In fact, the shoreline distance between the Israeli point 31 and the Lebanese point B1 is only 25.55 meters. However, when you stretch the lines towards the border with the maritime zone of Cyprus, you will receive a disputed area of 850 square kilometers. This area extends over blocks 1, 2, 3 in the map of licenses of exploitation of gas of the Israeli Ministry of Energy. In practice, no activity of exploration and exploitation have taken place in the disputed areas of blocks 1, 2, and 3. The closest fields are Karish and North Karish, which are exploited by Energean oil and gas, which also exploit the Tanin field. And adjacent thereto is the oil search exploitation area known as Alon D367. The director for the exploitation of oil at the at the Ministry of Energy instructed the license holder of Alon D367 not to drill in the area covered by the license at the request of the Foreign Ministry, the Defense Ministry, and the Malal, all of which for political and security consideration wish to prevent disputes in the matter of Israel's maritime economic zone with a hostile state, Lebanon. Just to, in order to place the economic interest in the correct perspective, it should be noted that in a notice issued by Energean in April 2019 in London, the estimate arising from the exploratory drilling in Karish field indicated the production of natural gas in Karish field at about 28 to 42 BCM. In a prior notice appearing in Israel's press, Energean signed supply contracts with Israeli interests for the annual supply of natural gas of more than 4 BCM from the Karish and Tanir fields. The Lebanese contention relating to the shoreline point B1 is based on the mapping of the border by England and France in 1923 by the means of the Joint Committee headed by Paulet of France and Newcomb of England. The Paulet-Newcomb Committee was preceded by negotiations between England and France dating from 1919 following the end of the First World War, where England believed that the French contribution to the war effort was not as expected, having regard also to the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which was concluded during the war in 1960, and the new circumstances and interests, such as the British Declaration expressed by the British Foreign Minister Lord Balfour, relating to the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine and the necessity of establishing water sources for the Jewish population in the Galilee, which necessitated a new definition of the border. In 1923, Britain and France adopted the conclusion of the Paulet-Newcomb Committee in relation to the border of the British and French mandates. However, in practice, the area was demarcated by temporary border stones and in military maps on a scale of 1 to 100,000, which do not permit an exact demarcation of the border between the two countries. The result is that in relation to the shoreline boundary of Lebanon, the Lebanese contentions are based on alleged border demarcation, which is not definitive and in which in any event has not been agreed as a definitive binding boundary with the neighboring state to the south, Israel, which Lebanon in any event does not recognize. In relation to the sea boundaries contended by Lebanon, this is in conflict with the boundary points agreed by Lebanon and Cyprus in the agreement which was ratified by Cyprus. A further difficulty facing Lebanon is that Israel, as opposed to Lebanon and Cyprus, has not ratified the UNCLOS Convention, precluding Israel from being subject to the jurisdiction of judicial institutions stated in the convention. It seems that of the three states, Cyprus, Lebanon, and Israel, Lebanon has the greatest interest in a regional cooperation, and that not only does the political situation in Lebanon prevent it from precluding oil and gas from within its economic maritime border, also the only land connection of Lebanon with Europe is through an unstable Syria. Therefore, it seems that a suggest, for example, of a common pipeline through Cyprus and Greece, or liquid gas installations serving the three countries, would certainly serve Lebanon's interest if Lebanon intends to exploit the energy sources at the bottom of the sea of its economic maritime zone, enable it to be an energy exporter with all the influence that it would attract. Leaving the area in a dispute and undeveloped does not serve the interest of any of the parties. And developing the area under a division will only improve the existing economic positions of both parties. A willingness to enter into a compromise agreement would result in a substantial economic benefit. For the purpose of allowing the delegations of the two parties to succeed with the discussions taking place these days, following the efforts of the American administration, and especially the Secretary of State for the Mediterranean, David Satterfield, it might be worth referring to the story of the pipeline as follows. In 1947, an American company began the laying of the tape line, the Trans-Arabian pipeline for the carriage of oil from the west of Saudi Arabia to Lebanon. The establishment of a state of Israel complicated the original intention of laying the pipeline to the port of Haifa, and the pipeline's course was changed to pass through the area known as Golan Heights, which at that time was controlled by Syria, and from there to the port of Sidon. At the time, 1950, the pipeline was the largest in the world, carrying 500,000 barrels of oil per day through Saudi Arabia, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. Following Israel's victory in the Six-Day War, that part of the pipeline, which traverses the Golan Heights for a distance of 47 kilometers, became under the Israeli control. However, Israel permitted the continued use of the pipeline through Golan Heights, and the pipeline was inactive until 1976, when it was replaced by the use of oil tankers carrying oil and transmitting it through navigation through the Suez Canal. If one so wishes, the use of the pipeline constitutes an example of cooperation, albeit passive, between Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Lebanon, and Israel in the context of exploitation and the use of energy sources. It might be that history in the above context will repeat itself, and hopefully it will be done currently and these days. So I hope I was within the 12 minutes limit. I did practice for that.
Perfect.
And, thank you very much.